Recording in progress.
To order. We will begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the federally recognized Muckleshoot Indian tribe, the ancestral keepers of the land we are gathered on today. We thank them for their immense contributions to our state and local history, culture, economy, and identity as Washingtonians. Hannah, will you please call roll?
Deputy Mayor Jayraj.
I'm here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Baldwin. Here. Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Malinga.
Here.
Councilmember Stearns.
Here.
Councilmember Troutman.
Here. Thank you. All right, for public participation tonight, the Auburn City Council special meeting will be held both in person and virtually. And we have one item on the agenda this evening. It is a discussion item of the 2023-2024 budget review. And Director Thomas, I believe the show is yours.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We've made it to day 3. Something to celebrate. Just as a quick recap, last week we went through all of the general fund and general governmental funds and activity, and we are moving into our proprietary funds and our utility funds tonight. I wanted to start with just a quick follow-up. Oh, let me start the slideshow. A lot to go through first. I wanted to start off with a follow-up. There was some questions at the end of the last meeting on Tuesday about the budget that we have currently for our anti-homelessness program, and do we have enough resources right now? I wanted to just kind of provide some budget detail. What we currently have budgeted towards that program. I have the 2022 budget as well as the 23 and 24 proposed budgets as far as that program is concerned. So this includes the salaries and benefits for our outreach employees, as well as the operational costs and the rent for the ACRC, some of the miscellaneous costs associated with providing services to those experiencing homelessness. And then we also have some one-time items that we have in the 2022 budget as well as the 23 and 24 budget, where we're using primarily some ARPA funding for those programs. So that includes some encampment cleanup as well as some general litter and illegal dumping, as well as housing vouchers for those experiencing homelessness. So that is how we have money currently allocated in our current budget and what we're proposing for 23 and 24. I've also talked to Director Tate. I know there were some questions about some of the other grants and contracts that we have with other agencies that might provide some addiction and counseling resources. And on October 10th, I know Director Tate's group will be coming and bringing much more detailed information about how we currently award those contracts and which contracts that we award. So moving on beyond that, that's into tonight's conversation. Again, I mentioned that we're going to go over our internal service funds, our proprietary funds, and then our fiduciary funds. Just a quick recap, our internal service funds, we have several internal service funds, and they're administered and overseen by several different department heads within the city. And so I've organized them by department, and those department heads will present kind of their portions of the budget as it relates to internal service funds. Some of these are much smaller than others. Then we'll move into proprietary funds, which are our utility funds. And then we also have our fiduciary funds. That should be a quick wrap up. And then we'll go into wrap up and some general review, summary review of the conversations that we had last week over our general fund budget. So internal service funds, we have a facilities, a multimedia, insurance, workers' comp, IT, and equipment rental fund. All of these services are provided to the city only. So we've got these departments, and they provide provide services back to all the cities, or to all the city's departments and funds within the city. All the costs are accounted for just in there. If we're using facilities, for example, all of the costs for that fund are accounted for, and then the cost is redistributed back to all of the other funds based on relative usage. In total, the general fund pays, but depending on which internal service fund it is, the general fund will pay 65 to 75% of each internal service fund's costs. And with that, I'm going to ask Director Hinman to come up and go over her facilities and multimedia internal service funds.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Mayor, and City Council. Good to see you again, 2 nights in a row. So as Director Thomas mentioned, I have 2 divisions that I oversee that are internal service funds. Talk to you first about our facilities division. And that division, just real quickly, we manage all of our city-owned facilities. Our job is to keep them maintained and in good repair and secure. And there is a formula by which these funds are allocated, mostly based on square footage, and a few other things are included in there. And we have kind of 2 budgets that we run from. One is just the general operating budget. That is the budget of exactly that, just general maintenance, regular repairs, all of that kind of stuff. And then the building specific things that I will talk about here in just 1 minute. And in this division, we are making 3 requests for some building-specific projects that we want to complete. Our goal always in facilities is to avoid emergencies, and that is to keep up with our maintenance of our buildings as best we can so that we are not deferring things to a point where we're having emergencies and spending a whole lot of money on very expensive projects. So the 3 projects that our facilities division is requesting one-time funds for are some golf course exterior repairs. That includes mostly a lighting project in the parking lot that will change out the lights to LED lights and some cosmetic exterior things to the clubhouse, painting, general repairs of the exterior. The other project that we are seeking funds for is our exterior repairs at the Senior Activity Center. That is pretty much painting the exterior of the building. And the last one, really, if I were to categorize this by priority, is the last one would be the most important one to us right now, and that is the carpet replacement at the Justice Center. It is very worn and has exceeded its life and has some it just needs to be replaced, and our police officers do certainly deserve to have that replaced. So those are the 3 new requests that we are making on top of the regular budget ask that we have. Any questions on that one?
Questions, Council? Councilmember Trout Manuel?
Where did you say these funds are going to be? These funds that are being asked, where are they going to come from? The general funds? You
Yes.
said?
Facilities it comes from the general fund. So our internal services funds are basically made up of a formula that is divided out between all of the departments. They pay into the facilities fund in order to create the budget for the maintenance of our city-owned buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Director Hinman. My question pertains to the Justice Center also. We've spoken in the past about complaints that I've heard about the temperature, particularly during the winter. You know, the security folks there standing right next to that door, and that the whole lobby apparently is pretty chilly at times. Anything in that direction?
So that one is a little complicated because King County is leasing that space from us.
Okay.
So anything that is done to that space does require approval from our staff, but the county is to pay for any types of improvements. And in that case, the challenge with that lobby area is basically that it's not being used for its intended purpose. It's intended to be a lobby, not intended to be occupied throughout the day. We have tried a number of different ideas to try to mitigate those things, but to be quite honest, it's a challenging thing to address just because the way that what it's being used for is not really what lobby space is designed used for. Our best answer is to move the entryway to the upstairs, but that doesn't seem like something that would work for King County courts to do. So I do believe that there was an electrical upgrade that was suggested. One thing that happens often is they may plug in space heaters, and that will overload the system, and then it trips the breakers, and then it kind of causes all sorts of things. So there are things that can be done to mitigate somewhat, but it's just challenging. So that requires work directly with the county to make those things happen.
All right, thank you. Maybe we could talk about a strategy there. Thanks.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. One question I was going to ask is, it looked like in the notes around goals from the previous cycle into this, is that there had been one to redo the wood floor at the senior center. Is that still tracking to be completed?
That was done.
That was
yeah,
done?
There was some water damage that happened out there. There is another thing that they're trying to trace. There is some water intrusion in there, and that's requiring a good deal of detective work to try to figure out where that's coming from. But the floor was done.
Okay.
Council, other questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you. And then the second question I have with regards to facilities, and this may overlap with Ingrid's area a little bit, for our parking lots around our facilities in the city, are we looking at any point to bring in charging stations to support, vehicle charging in those lots?
So we don't manage parking lots in the facilities division, so we do buildings and the interior, and parking lots and other things are managed by other departments, and it depends on which parking lot you're talking about. So that is a question that would probably go to another director.
No problem. Thank you.
Other questions, Council? Okay.
Okay, and the multimedia division, again, we do have a formula by which the departments pay into this fund, and the multimedia department handles basically all communications, graphic design, digital communications, print, mail, you name it, we do it, and we support all of our city departments in this effort. And we do not have any new requests for multimedia. Our budget, our baseline budget, is essentially the same. Our goal each year is twofold, really. We live and die on deadlines, so we aim to meet and beat every deadline that is put in front of us. And the other one is to continue to reduce our paper usage as much as possible, and moving things into digital formats as much as we can and where we can. So not a lot in multimedia. Any questions there?
Questions, Council? No?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next fund that we're going to go over is the Workers' Compensation Fund. This fund is kind of quasi overseen by both HR and finance. So I'm just going to kind of give a brief overview of it. 70% of the Workers' Comp Fund is paid for out of the general fund in the form of employee benefits. So both employees and employers contribute to the Workers' Comp Fund because we are self-insured, and so we collect a percentage of salaries, both from the employee and the employer, to contribute into this fund, and this is where we make our workers' comp payments out of. There's also a couple of other similarly related payments that we make out of this fund as well each year. That includes our our quarterly L&I assessments, our stop loss, and our and medical expenses related to workers' comp claims as well. It's a well-funded fund. We haven't needed to adjust either the employee or the employee rates in order to fully fund this in the last several budget cycles. Any questions on?
Questions, Council? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. So we are self-insured,
Correct.
and do we have a third-party administrator?
We do.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I might have to defer to Director Martinson to remind me the name of our third-party administrator. Okay, sorry.
So we just switched third-party administrators recently, and so our new third-party administrator is Everly Vivian.
Okay. Thanks. I'm not familiar with that one, but all right. Thank you very much.
Kent uses them. They came highly recommended based off some research. We were unhappy with our previous TPA.
Renton as well. So.
Other questions, Council? Councilmember Trot Manuel.
Could you explain why we have the revenue less expenditure highlighted?
On page 17?
On page 17.
So in all of these funds, we highlight that, and so now that we're no longer in the general fund and we're in all these other funds, we're just highlighting what the change in, it really is the change in that fund balance every year. So,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
there wasn't any specific reason on that one.
Yeah, because I noticed it in some other ones and I quite didn't understand why.
In this book too, when we break down all those other funds, we just highlight, it's just kind of the formatting that we've used, the template that we've used to highlight how that fund balance has changed at the end of each year.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions, Council? Okay.
And that brings me to the insurance fund, which is also a fund that has a little bit less activity in it. It's currently fully funded. We don't do any contributions to it on a regular basis. This pays for our unemployment claims. We also pay for our liability insurance out of this fund, but then we reimburse the fund through all the departments based on their relative usage of that insurance. I mentioned on Monday when we were talking about some of the significant drivers for the general fund costs, one of those was our liability insurance was increasing in 2023 by over $1 million. And so we pay for it out of this fund. You don't necessarily see the transactions because those transactions then are reimbursed through the contributions from all of the other funds citywide. But we do manage that initial payment. We make a payment once a year to our insurance carrier at the beginning of the year, and then throughout the year, all the other funds contribute into that fund to pay it back. We also pay for our unemployment claims out of this fund as well. But like I said, this is a fully funded fund. We did an infusion of money several budget cycles ago to keep this fund funded for many years, and currently we're not seeing anything in the next 6 to 8 years that would require another infusion of money into this fund to continue paying our unemployment claims.
Questions on that, council? Okay.
And now I'm going to pass it over to Director Travis to talk about our Innovation and Technology Fund.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. For the record, my name is David Travis, Director of Innovation and Technology. Before I get started, I kind of want to thank the entire IT team who's been through a lot in the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. I have a couple of them here. Ashley, the Assistant Director. We have Ken, the Project Manager. And then you guys all know Chrissy back there who graciously helps us every time we have a problem. The IT department is kind of broken internally into kind of 4 different segments. Customer success, which is kind of our business side, and the customer support side of IT. So that's the things where people call and ask us for help. The infrastructure side, which is our transport. So that's the fiber optics, the transportation of the ones and zeros, which is basically all the lifeblood of IT and how things move across everything inside of our environment. Our geographical information system, so that's all of our geospatial analysis, and any of our digital or geocoded asset management is within that infrastructure. And then the 4th piece is cyber defense, which we kind of consider an onion. And whenever we talk about cyber defense inside the city, we always try to put it in the aspect of an onion, which comes with layers and different pieces. It's not just one thing, it's a bunch of things that come together to make the city more secure. Again, the COVID pandemic taught us a lot. We realized quickly that, from an IT service department, we weren't ready. And from that day forward in March of 2020, there's been a lot of changes in the city. And I know some people went through the pains with us as we moved and went through our rapid mobile first, cloud first strategies that were supposed to be long durations, and we did them in months and weeks. One of the things that we talk about in our accomplishments is, as you guys all have started to get your surface deployments, so the money that comes to us, we are pushing more and more mobile technology. We are creating better ways to store data inside of our cloud infrastructures. We've hyper-converged all of our data, and this is a good example how technology can help us as a city to survive any type of disaster, especially like COVID. But you figure the disasters that we're all waiting for are the earthquakes or the mountains to do something drastic, right? So with our hyper-converged infrastructure pieces that we put in place before, so around 3 years ago, a full backup within the environment was around 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Sometimes we could get it all backed up in a week. Our anticipated recovery, if we ever had a major disaster in our data centers, was probably 2 to 3 weeks, which when you look at that at its face value is bad. So we worked as a group to hyper-converge everything into 2 data centers. One is here in the city property and one is at a third-party data location, utilizing some data center technologies. We now back up everything that we are responsible for every 4 hours, and that every 4-hour backup is replicated to a secondary location that we can spin up and bring back online in 30 minutes. That's hard work, and it took a lot of teamwork to get there, and that's where when we look at some of these IT budgets, what we're really talking about is the survivability of how we operate as a city. Part of the things that we're working on right now is our Wi-Fi expansion. Part of that Wi-Fi expansion is the reimagination of how we deploy Wi-Fi. We've talked about expanding Wi-Fi, the Access Auburn to communities that are underserved. And the only way for us to get there is either one, spend a lot of money to expand fiber networks, or we use partners in cloud technology to, work with our business partners to just put access points strategically placed around the city. And that's one of the projects we're actively working on right now, though, that'll really give the city a good push for access to the internet. Of course, to support that, we have to beef up all of our infrastructure. So we just finished a project where we moved all of our fiber backbones to 25 gigs, 10 gig internet speeds up and down. We've also implemented recently a new fiber ring within the city, which we never had before. That was recently lit up. That fiber ring allows us to have 5 core locations within the city that are redundantly, if one location goes down, all the traffic goes the other way. So it kind of works systematically. And that allows us, again, to, rather than lose one location, lose everything, we lose one or two locations. We're still up and running as a city within our environment. We've expanded the use of artificial intelligence as part of our onion for the cyber defense. That artificial intelligence helps us make decisions within milliseconds rather than making human decisions that could be minutes, days, or hours later. And we all know, and we've seen inside cyber awareness, that every minute counts, and every minute could be $1 million in recoverable assets if we're not reacting fast enough. So again, we use artificial intelligence, and we've expanded that technology to make sure that we detect those anomalies in milliseconds. One of the other things that we've done in IT recently, within the last year, is we've started to use outsourced contract employees. And what that's allowed us to do is really expand the team during the time of need and contract the team back down when it's not needed, rather than having full-time FTEs who are always keeping busy. This has been it's really worked well in IT, and that's, we attribute that to just the workforce itself being able to kind of move and flow with how we operate. A lot of things that we do in IT are project-based, big project-based systems. So as we bring in those big projects, we need to expand the team, and then as those projects die down, we contract the team. The goals for 23-24 for IT are to continue to push our cloud-first, mobile-first strategies so that we can be mobile and flexible in the event of any disaster or any item that's pushed at us within the city. We need to be able to stand up the city infrastructure at any moment, at any time, on any day. We are also going to expand the collaboration tools that are allowed, or that we have as part of our licensing agreements with our vendors, including Microsoft Enterprise agreements. We plan to utilize our C3 consortium membership, which is a consortium of cities and government entities that have built a redundant fiber backbone that goes around the Puget Sound area. We'll use that to give us a disparate 10 gig path to our cloud infrastructure. And as members of that consortium, we can do that for free. We'll continue to push all of our dependencies away from anything that we house internal in the city to cloud infrastructure. That includes utilizing technologies like OneDrive or different synchronized technologies that allow the data to be wherever we're at, whenever we need it, rather than just connected to a city infrastructure. And finally, we'll continue to reshape how we consume and visualize data using our GIS infrastructures, mapping systems, and different pieces of geographical asset data. I do have two budget highlights. Can you talk about the first one?
Yes, it's definitely more finance driven.
Yes.
So the baseline change in the IT department's budget increased pretty significantly over 2022, and there's three factors at play. One is that there was a contribution that we're budgeting a contribution in both 2023 and 2024 for capital replacements out of the operating fund into the capital fund. We did not budget for that in 2022, so that accounts for $500,000 of that increase. $480,000 is for communication costs. In the past, that used to be an individual line item within each individual department and division within each department in the city. That created a lot of work in IT when they were entering their monthly invoices and trying to code one invoice across 25 different cost centers or more every single month. So it just made more sense, like we do with all of the other services in IT, just to pay for the invoice out of IT and allocate those costs, have it allocated as part of the one overall IT allocation into each department each month. So that $480,000, it was an increase to the IT budget, but it was a decrease everywhere else in all the other funds citywide. And then the last piece is $455,000. This is for those general fund services. You have to put your thinking cap back onto almost the very beginning of the presentation on Monday night when I talked about, you saw a charges for services line that increased by $900,000 in the general fund beginning in 2023. And that had to do with the way we were reallocating out some of our general fund services that relates to finance, HR, certain pieces of the legal department, and then also the new DEI program. Those costs are getting allocated out to all the other departments. IT is a pretty big department based on the number of FTEs they have. So a large portion of IT's increase is related to that $900,000 that the general is related to some of the $900,000 that the general fund is receiving in additional revenue, but at the expense of other departments like IT.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add with the communication change, just to give you an example of how significant this is for our team. The Verizon bill that we use for our cell phones takes around 3 to 4 days to pay, because you have to go through every single phone number and allocate that to every single cost center, and a lot of them are put into multiple cost centers. So a $44 phone bill will be split up into 4 different cost centers. Then you got to go back and reconcile the total with all of those things, and sometimes you're off by 33 cents, and you could spend another day trying to find your 33 cents. So what we've done in this move is basically now we'll do our normal review to make sure there's no anomalies within the bill and just pay the bill. And we're talking probably 10 minutes now to 15 minutes to view.
And to reiterate, that would be treating it the same way that we treat all of the other licenses and programs within IT.
Yes. So the last two things, new requests. The first one, we're asking for a security engineer. We have somebody now on staff that handles our security permanently, but they're kind of a mixed bag of people. They do a bunch of other tasks too. So what we're looking for is to move and have somebody dedicated to just handle the security piece of that. And then the second one is there's been a request to expand some camera systems into the parking lot area of the golf course. And the reason that number is a little bit higher than we would normally see is just because the golf course parking lot itself doesn't have the infrastructure already in place to just expand cameras into that lot. So there'll be a little bit of extra work to make that happen. So with that, are there any questions?
Council? Deputy Mayor Jayraj?
Thank you, Mayor. Director Travis, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is, with the IT security engineer, what would his function be?
So the primary purpose of that dedicated person is to continue to just always monitor all of the security. So that's your firewalls, that's the systems that are running for virtual networks, all the configuration pieces that are on all your computers or all the thousands of devices, and also constantly monitoring all of the artificial intelligence to say every time we get an alert, there's action being taken, and that action isn't taking longer than it needs to be. So their work will be focused 100% on that, and then they'll also be the liaison between our outside security partner that we have a retainer with. In the event that we have a cyber event, they're the team that comes in and help us isolate and secure and work with all of the agencies that need to be involved, FBI, those kind of things. So they'll be that permanent liaison.
Thank you.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. First, I just want to note that the response times that you articulated for council going from, potentially a week or multiple weeks to be able to stand your services back up, to get IT back up and running after a disaster or after an event, getting that down to regular 4-hour backups in a 30-minute window for disaster recovery is a phenomenal improvement. So just really want to say huge kudos to that. That's quite an achievement to be able to get to that. In addition to that, having processed vouchers with Councilmember Baggett, seeing all the line items for the mobile phones, I'll be excited to have fewer pages in my vouchers to review in that area going forward. And then from a question standpoint, for the footprint for free public Wi-Fi, I want to put bigger stars next to that. Could you go into a little bit more detail about what that might look like for people in the community
Sure.
as you continue to work on that effort?
Sure. So one of the ideas that we're throwing out, so the current footprint is, it's mapped out. We know exactly where that is. So what the idea is that we take these new cloud devices that we're putting in place to possibly work with our business partners and maybe stand one up in their facility. So if that will extend it another block, that would be excellent, right? Or if we look at the edges of the city and see any of our areas that may benefit from free Wi-Fi, can we just stand something up close to them rather than building all the infrastructure and fiber optics out, which is millions of dollars. We can do a secure device with internet access for around $1,000, and that will expand. So another good example is like the resource center that we have. That resource center is not connected to our infrastructure, but we could easily stand public Wi-Fi out of that building and connect it to the corporate network.
Other Councilmember Troutman, and then Councilmember Stearns, and then Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Travis, awesome. When I saw your 2021, 2022 done, that's remarkable. And then your goals for 23, 24, those are kind of, exciting to see. And also, I'm on a committee called HELO. This is our top priority in National Leagues of Cities, because a lot of the cities don't have what we have, and I'm always bragging about how advanced our city is, and to see what you're just telling us tonight, I would like to see us bring more money to our city with HELO supporting this. And a lot of the cities that we're working with don't have what we have. They don't have the broadband system. They don't have the Wi-Fi in some of their communities for their children to be able to access their homework and stuff. So this is really good to see that we're in a good place.
Yeah.
Our city is.
Yeah, thank you for that. And some of the funding that we're using for that expansion is the ARPA funding. So that's really been beneficial in this project specifically.
Okay. Well, thank you for a great report so far.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Director. I was wondering, does the city have, do we coordinate or do we share services with the school district?
From a technology standpoint, we don't have anything with the school district, but we are a good partner with the school district. I mean, a good example of a partnership with the school district is March 2020, COVID hit, things went a little crazy, and we reached out to the school district, and within an hour, they brought us, 40 Wi-Fi hotspots that we can start just dishing out to people. No questions, they just made it happen. And I think that just means that as a group, council, the mayor, that those relationships are there to make that available. But from a technology standpoint, there's nothing that we do that they don't already do even better. The school districts are usually set up from a technology standpoint are well funded. So we usually look to them in all of our meetings and stuff like that to see what the next thing is and how we get there. So they definitely help us with that. We do supply technology services for other cities, so like the City of Pacific, the City of Algona. We supply computer services and technology for VRFA, Valleycom, but just not specifically the school district.
Great. Yeah, you mentioned, thinking of the security in terms of a onion. I was thinking it in terms of like a Russian nesting doll.
Yeah, same thing.
And just so you're aware, and I think council, most of you are aware of the cities and schools organization that we do have that's comprised of Auburn, Algona Pacific, the Auburn School District, and Green River College. And Muckleshoot Indian Tribe has always been invited. Unfortunately, they have not chosen to participate on a regular basis, but those meetings are intended for us to work through issues. When Howard Hansen Dam crisis was a real thing, we worked very closely. The emergency response groups, our emergency managers, IT, they all worked very closely to ensure that we were taking care of one another. So those relationships are there. It may not be as formal on a day-to-day basis, but those relationships are truly there and have been nurtured for a long time.
Yeah, and I would say thank you to the mayor, who's been very open since I got here just under 4 years ago, that if we can help a neighbor in any way, we help a neighbor, and that usually gets reciprocated tenfold. So,
thank you. Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just the last point in that area of the public Wi-Fi is that right now your strategic goal shows it as part of service, but I think that that could easily also cover perhaps wellness or celebration. You know, I can't think of anyone who's a young adult who doesn't still always want to be connected. So when we think about making our parks and our spaces available to people as they're doing flexible work, as they're, you know, maybe you've got Green River College students who want to sit in cafes or do their thing. Being able to have more of that coverage, I think, just creates that space to bring in more people to Auburn and into our public places, and be able to still do what they need to do. So I think that's fantastic.
Deputy Mayor Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Director Travis, my concern is cyber terrorism. If we do
You know you're not going to get much of an answer when you're asking questions on cyber terrorism, right?
I can
Just
be
making
I
sure
can be,
you
I can be
understand that
generic.
in advance.
I can be generic.
Okay. No, my question is are we prepared for that?
We are prepared.
Especially with the public Wi-Fi that we're talking about.
We are prepared in every way that we've been advised to be prepared for.
Okay. That's all.
I don't want to.
10, 12 words, that was good. Other questions?
And we can talk one-on-one if you'd like to know a couple more things. Sure.
All right, no other questions?
All right.
All right, and our last internal service fund, but not least, is the Equipment Rental and Replacement Fund.
So good evening. For the record, Inger Gaub, Public Works Director. So for the Equipment Repair and Rental Fund, this is the fund that basically does all the maintenance and servicing, acquisition and disposal of the city's vehicle and equipment fleet, along with managing our central stores, which procures, stores, and distributes supplies and materials, not only for Public Works, but for other departments of the city as well. In addition, we manage the city's fuel system for the entire city. So this starts on page 267. On page 271 on that, it indicates that we have, I believe, currently 13 FTEs. A portion of those FTEs are our administrative staff for the Maintenance and Operations Division in total, so they're not all funded by equipment rental. They're also funded by utilities and a small portion from the general fund as well as equipment rental. Within the equipment rental fund, about 9 of those FTEs are specific to the equipment rental fund. Overall, again, it's funded through a combination of funds, just like all the other internal service funds. We do that based on charges for service to other departments. And that makes up approximately, 68% of the equipment rental fund, which is about 3.6% of the overall general fund budget. So our costs for equipment rental are broken down by 3 different areas. Those 3 different areas are for fuel. So for that, we look at the last full 3 years of fuel usage by each department and their vehicles to determine what their charge is going to be for the next biennium. So for this biennium, we've looked at 2019 to 2021 to determine what that fuel usage has been. And while you might be considering that COVID may have had an impact on how much fuel we used, it really did not. All of our police kept working, all of our public works staff and all of our park staff kept working and kept using those vehicles. So Our fuel usage over that time period pretty much stayed as it was prior to COVID and as it is now after COVID. So those costs are then allocated out to those departments based upon that fuel usage by those departments' vehicles. The vehicle replacement portion, so this is based upon the actual vehicles that are in our inventory. And usually our replacement each year are for vehicles that have already been paid into the system. So if we purchase a vehicle for a department, every year after that, based upon their replacement cycle, they're paying a portion into the equipment rental fund in order to have the funds available for that replacement by the time that replacement cycle is up. And then the last piece of that is our maintenance, and that's based upon the number of vehicles that we have in our inventory, as well as the anticipated amount of service that's going to be needed for that equipment over that biennium based upon national standards. So within the equipment rental fund, we have two budgets. We have our operating budget and our capital budget. Operations, obviously that's where all of our maintenance work is done, and all of our central stores costs and our staff costs are done. The capital is for not only the purchase of new equipment and vehicles, but it's also for any capital building improvements we need for equipment rental, so the shop improvements, or for any other types of software or other capital improvement to keep our equipment rental system functioning. So accomplishments that we've had over the last biennium. So we are currently wrapping up upgrading of the city's fuel system and incorporating renewable diesel fuels into the options available through our new fuel vendor contract that we are finishing up negotiations for. That allows us to also have emergency fuel opportunities. So if we're in an emergency situation, our new contract has a requirement that they provide that fuel within 48 hours. So, which is not something that we've had in the past. So that is significant because we do have a very small tank for the amount of vehicles that we have. So we're currently filling that tank about once a month. And so it's important that we have access to that fuel quickly when we need it. We also completed a replacement of our GPS tracking system for the majority of our fleet that have that GPS tracking system on it. So this is the system that allows us to know where the equipment is and where within the city it is. So think about emergency response, inclement weather response. We can know immediately where a vehicle is, whether we can deploy them to another emergency near that area, who do we have in that area that can respond. All of that is through that GPS tracking system. In addition, that gives us more visibility on the vehicle use and the mechanical issues and the history, which helps us to improve the overall maintenance and efficiencies of our fleet system. We are also in the process of doing design for phase 1 of the facility master plan. This is including the expansion for the fleet bay space and down at the M&O. In addition to that, we are adding into that contract a replacement of the electrical service at M&O so that we can expand the amount of electricity that we have available at M&O. We currently have maximized out the service that we currently have there. So part of our overall plan with fleet obviously is to bring in more electric vehicles and more hybrid vehicles. But in order to do that, we need the ability to charge, and we cannot do that with the service that we have there now. So we're taking advantage of this first project to get the service in place. The future facility master plan projects, phase 2, would include the implementation of the charging stations. For goals for the coming biennium, obviously it's to complete that first phase of the expansion for M&O. And then we also will continue to look again for more fuel economy measures that we need to do. There are some requirements under state law that once we hit a certain number of gallons used per year, that we have to increase our work to reduce our emissions for our fleet. That goal, or that criteria, is 200,000 gallons per year. We're currently at about 180,000 gallons of fuel used per year, so we're getting close to that number. So as we replace vehicles, we look at, can we replace with electric, can we replace with hybrid, what are the other alternatives? Bringing in the renewable diesel will also help reduce those emissions for our diesel equipment. So we look at all of that to help get us below, either stay below that 200,000 or to address reducing the emissions should we actually exceed that 200,000. We also continue to work towards obtaining the ASE Certified Blue Shield Repair Facility status. So what this does really is that this allows us to have an independent third-party certification that's basically verifying that we have the knowledge and capability to do the repair work efficiently and effectively, and also gives us some tracking tools for evaluating how training is actually improving that knowledge with our staff. We're also working to continue to complete the GM warranty work certification so that we can do GM warranty work in-house. We currently have the certifications to do the Ford warranty work in-house, and that also comes with the paperwork processing to actually get the warranty payment in from Ford for doing that warranty work. And then we're also working to identify options for improving fleet security to help reduce some of the vandalism and theft that we're experiencing with our fleet. So for the budget, so the main fluctuations in the baseline budget are really related to capital projects and equipment purchases, which obviously, as we replace equipment every year, it's based on a very specific list, and so that capital expenditure fluctuates every year depending upon what's included in that list. And the city's replacement cycle in general is about 8 to 10 years for vehicles, for our regular vehicles. Large equipment, so our dump trucks, our Vectors, those are usually 10 years at a minimum. Many of them we keep longer than that. And then with the new patrol program, if that is adopted by council, then we will be modifying the police patrol vehicles to go from a 4-year replacement cycle to a 6-year replacement cycle. So as those vehicles are assigned to officers, when they're up for replacement, they'll be on a 6-year replacement cycle. All patrol vehicles currently are on a 4-year replacement cycle because of the amount of mileage that gets driven. Regardless of that year for the replacement cycle, we actually use about 100,000 miles on the vehicle as the target for when we look to replace the vehicle. And that's because based on national standards, once we get beyond 100,000, the cost to maintain that vehicle starts becoming more expensive than the cost to replace the vehicle. So we look at that years of service, 100,000 miles, and then also what is the cost to actually maintain that vehicle in service. All of that plays into how long we actually keep the vehicle for, but we use the replacement cycle for determining what is the cost that everybody is paying into the equipment rental fund. And then, yeah, increases related to the cost of, sorry, we lost the screen, related to the cost of regular salaries, just as with every other budget, those costs are increasing, so that is a portion of the increased cost for this. So we do have a few requests associated with the equipment rental program. So the first of those is the mechanic, which is on page 326 of book 2. So this, regardless of whether we do the patrol assigned vehicles or not, we are at a point where we need an additional mechanic just to maintain our current fleet. We probably actually need about 1.5 mechanics to do that, but right now we're not planning to hire 1.5, obviously, so we need 1 mechanic to do that. And that is really based on, again, national standards for what are the service hours that we should be doing for the fleet, the age of the fleet, the type of fleet we have, versus how many staff hours we actually have. And that's showing us that we're woefully understaffed for maintaining that fleet and keeping it going. So getting that additional mechanic will help us meet that need to keep our fleet functioning, as well as give us a little bit more capability to do some more in-house fabrication, which will reduce our reliance on vendors and reduce some of our costs. The next one in there is the heavy-duty lift on page 324. So this has to do with what happens after we finish the expansion for the fleet. So when we finish phase 1 of the facility master plan in doing the expansion of the shops, right now we have 1 lift for heavy vehicles. We are asking for the cost to install a second lift for heavy vehicles. So you can imagine during an inclement weather event when we have plows down, right now we can only work on 1 of those at a time if there's anything on the undercarriage that's required to be worked on, because we only have 1 lift. So having 2 of these would allow us to expand that and have better resources to actually get that equipment back in service when it's needed most. So that's what that heavy-duty lift is. And then the shop roll-up doors is on page 325. So these are doors that are original to the building, so they have definitely exceeded their service life. They're becoming less and less reliable for being able to operate and get them open and closed. In addition, they're not insulated doors, so you can also, again, imagine during that inclement weather when we're on 12-hour, 24-hour shifts, where they're out there in the middle of sub-zero temperatures trying to work on equipment, and it's very, very cold out in those bays. So we're asking to replace 5 of those remaining doors with new insulated doors to improve the shop space. And then the last one on here, this is a repeat of one you already heard about before from police on their fleet expansion. This is just to reiterate, there is a portion of this that's related to equipment rental in here because we are, part of those costs are the replacement costs as well as the fuel costs and the service costs, ongoing costs for those vehicles, as well as the 3 positions that we're asking for, not to fill within the current biennium, but to fill in the next 2 bienniums over time as we continue that 6-year implementation of the fleet system. And then, go ahead. So one last piece, so this is a quick summary of the equipment that is making up the capital purchase costs for what's planned to be replaced in the budget cycle. We've broken it down by vehicle versus large equipment. So your vehicles are your police cars, your trucks, your vans, your SUVs. The large equipment are our dump trucks, Vectors, plow and sander attachments, which are separate in our system from the actual vehicle, and then trailers. So you can see that breakdown between the 2 years as to what we're actually doing for replacement within our fleet. We currently have about 450 different pieces of equipment, roughly 450 in our system. So that gives you an idea how many we have and then how many we replace each year. And with that, any questions on equipment rental?
Questions, Council? Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. God, my brain is tied to the screen. But I think I had a question on the last item, which was the sort of a squiggly mark and then 825,000. And said, is that times 6 or is that 825 or whatever divided by 6?
It's approximately, it's approximately 825,000, just because that's for the initial upkeep of those vehicles, and depending on how many vehicles we purchase each year and the cost of the vehicles as time goes on each year, it's approximately $825,000 each year.
So, and that's for 6 years.
Correct. That's for purchasing 8 to 9 vehicles over a 6-year period of time.
And so what would the total cost be?
That goes back to our.
So that was on page 341 in your current book.
So the total cost for, we don't have the 6-year costs, but it's 6 years times 825,000 for the purchase of those 49 vehicles.
So that's like 5 million?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, I think between 5.5 and 6 million.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions, Council? Councilmember Baldwin?
Thank you, Your Honor. For the vehicle program, for the police department, for the take-home vehicles, do you know what type of vehicles we're exploring for that space? I think my preference, of course, would be to be as close to full electric as we could, but depending on what the needs are for the officers in the field, do we have in mind what those might look like?
Yeah, so the current program for our current patrol vehicles, we have hybrids in our system. So we haven't yet gone to full electric because full electric, they don't quite have the capacity to handle the amount of electronics and systems that the police vehicles have. And I don't know if Chief Collier wants to weigh in on that as well. But what we would be doing, we would be matching that with any new fleet for the assigned vehicles would also be those hybrid vehicles. And they would, again, be retained for roughly 6 years or until we hit that 100,000.
Okay. So potentially over those 6 years, if better technology comes out, we would be exploring potentially full EV if there was something that met
Yeah.
the needs.
As the EV technology advances, we'll see betterments in future years. We're not quite there yet for electric vehicles, for things like police vehicles or even a lot of our bigger dump trucks and those types of vehicles. They're not quite ready for that. The bucket truck that we did replace probably 2 years ago, we actually did that with a hybrid as well. So there are options out there, and that's something our fleet manager does every year when we're looking at what we are replacing. We're working with the department that vehicle is for to determine, can we do an electric vehicle? Can we do a hybrid? What can we do? Can we look at alternative fuels for that with the renewable diesel? The all-electric fleet, our biggest concern right now is having the charging stations and the power available to be able to do the charging stations. So getting that power service redone at our maintenance and operations yard so that we can actually put in a charging station there and have a sufficient number of charging stations for a sufficient electric fleet is something we're working towards.
Okay.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Thank you, Mayor. Ingrid, you were talking about doing 177 vehicles, GPS. Are we doing? You said we're going to do all of them, including the police cars.
So the police do not have the GPS system on them on those patrol vehicles. The rest of the city's fleet has the GPS system on them. So all of our maintenance and operation vehicles, our parks vehicles, any of our pool vehicles, those all have the GPS system on them.
So, Chief?
Yeah, so right now, our body cameras do have a GPS function, and every officer is required to wear one when they're working.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
Other questions, Council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. In the one area that you had talking about the General Motors in-house warranty provider, is that a certification or?
Yes, so in order for our staff to be able to perform that warranty work, they have to go through a certification process and get basically approval from GM to be able to be a warranty provider. And then once we have that, just like we've done with the Ford program, when we do that warranty work, there's paperwork we submit to General Motors for basically reimbursement for the costs for that warranty work.
Okay, so does that wind up being cost savings in the end?
There is a revenue stream that definitely comes in, but it does generate some administrative staff time that we have to do to process those, but it does reduce the downtime for the vehicles, because by being able to do that warranty work ourselves, we don't have to wait for a vendor to actually get it, do the warranty work, and then bring it back. That downtime is much, much longer, and so big picture cost savings, less downtime, staff time, and a reimbursement for the costs that we do. It's a savings overall.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Ingrid, thank you, ma'am. You mentioned about the vandalism going on, and what are we doing to kind of control that?
So I don't know that there's any way to control that, but one of the systems that we are looking at is a monitoring system, a video camera, voice-activated, monitored system for some of the locations where we have vehicles parked that we're seeing that potential vandalism happening more frequently.
So they're happening while they're out in the city, or when?
This is typically overnight situations, when they're parked overnight.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Council? Okay.
So we've now completed all of the internal service fund discussions. So we're going to segue into all of our proprietary funds, which are our utility funds in the city, as well as our airport and our cemetery funds. Before I hand it back over to Ingrid again to talk about a couple more of her funds, I did want to just preface the budgets that you see on these pages for water, sewer, and storm are based on the rate study that we're currently having done by our consultant. So we built our budget based on the same assumptions and the same information that we gave that rate consultant. So assuming that this budget is assuming any rate increases necessary to perform the operations, maintenance, and the capital in this budget would be tied to whatever rate increases the consultant is recommending. So those will be the series of 3 presentations that you will be receiving from the rate consultant through October and into November. And if the council opted not to move forward with the recommendations of the rate consultant, that would mean coming back and revisiting the budget for these funds and making adjustments. I'm also going to note right now, one of the things that you're going to see on all of these all of the internal utility funds is a pretty large increase, and that is related to that 1.5% City of Auburn utility tax increase. That's part of that Transportation Benefit District ad hoc committee recommendation that Ingrid has brought to the council. We discussed it last night. We started with the 0.1% increase on the sales tax levy. The second really important piece to that is increasing utility tax rates, the city's utility tax rate by 1.5%. And so when you're seeing some of these large increases in these next couple of slides, a lot of that is being driven by the increased costs for paying those taxes to the street, the street preservation and the arterial preservation fund. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ingrid.
Okay, so we have 4 utility funds that Public Works oversees, and these are enterprise funds. So you might recall that an enterprise fund, you can't use those funds for anything other than that intended purpose. So these funds all are, their revenues are all generated through user fees and connection charges, and they don't receive any of the funding from the general fund, so they must be self-sufficient funds. So just really quickly, the water utility provides the potable water to our customers, and our water is supplied by wells and springs that are backed up by intertie connections with other water purveyors. We also supply Algona with their water, and we have a wholesale agreement with Lake Meridian Water District. The system includes pipes, valves, fittings, pumps, pressure-reducing stations, wells, reservoirs, collection facilities, and treatment facilities. The sanitary sewers utility collects and conveys sewage from our customers and conveys it to King County wastewater system for treatment at their Renton plant. The city does not provide its own treatment, and the system includes pipes, manholes, force mains, and pump stations. The storm drainage utility collects stormwater from public facilities such as roads and sidewalks and conveys, treats, and/or releases to natural drainage ways such as creeks and rivers, or infiltrates into groundwater systems. The system also conveys discharges from private storm systems, typically after detention and treatment by the private owners. The public system includes pipes, manholes, catch basins, ponds, swales, vaults, treatment facilities, and ditches. And then again, the King County Metro is simply a pass-through of the charges for that treatment of our sewage system. So it's a charge that we collect from our customers, and then we pass through to pay King County for that treatment. So accomplishments for all 4 of these utilities. So for water, we completed the construction of the lead service line replacement project, and also the Academy pump station replacement and the deduct meter replacement. We've also received the extension for the completion of our water comp plan, and then began working on that comp plan update as part of the overall city comprehensive plan. That's due to be completed by 2024. That's true for sewer as well as for storm as well. We also completed phase 1 of 3 phases of the analysis that's required by the Department of Ecology for our water rights application that we actually applied for in 2006. However, it was not moved forward by Department of Ecology until 2021. So we've currently been working through that process with Ecology. For sewer, we also completed the flow monitoring and identified areas of infiltration and inflow issues for analysis in that comp plan update that's upcoming. We also began to do our asset inventory for the sewer system. And for storm, we actually completed our asset inventory for the storm system, so that was a fairly significant effort. You might imagine a lot of the storm system was built quite a while ago, and before we actually had a storm utility, and a significant portion of it also we inherited from King County, and King County did not have complete records necessarily on all of that storm system. So it took several years to complete that asset inventory across the city, but we finally did actually get it done this last year, so we're excited by that. We also completed the required code updates for the source control program required by our NPDES permit, and began, again, working on the comp plan. So the goals as we go into 23 and 24 for water and sewer and storm, obviously, is to complete that comprehensive plan update by the end of 2024. For water, we also need to complete phases 2 and 3 of that water rights analysis with Department of Ecology to complete our application and determine if we can get additional water rights for the city. For water, we also need to complete some significant projects that are in our capital program that include some of the funds that we actually issued bonds for in 2020, completing those projects. And one significant project in there is completing the Coal Creek Springs transmission line replacement. That is the new line to go across the White River. And then for water, we also have the requirement, you may recall this from a previous discussion, I believe earlier this year, for copper and lead rules related to service lines. So we have a requirement to complete an inventory and a process for notifying if there are potentially lead service lines, not only within the city's service line to a property, but within the private side of the service line. And that is required to be completed by October of 2024. For sewer, one of our focuses is improving our outreach and communication with businesses on our fats, oils, and grease program, so our FOG program. That is by far one of the biggest contributors to our backups from our sewer system, which is probably the biggest concern and issue with our sewer system. And then our intent is to complete about 50% of the sewer asset inventory by the end of the biennium. For storm, we need to complete the implementation of the source control program that's required by the NPDES permit. We also continue working on the implementation of our ditch management system program. And then for all the utilities, we continue to improve our coordination with our streets projects so that we can identify efficiencies in how we actually do all of our capital projects. So for water, budget highlights for that. As Jamie mentioned, significant piece of that increase is related to the utility tax rate increase for the 1.5%. And that, again, that's incorporated into the analysis that the rate consultant is doing, is what that actually plays into for the rate increase that may be proposed. In addition, we have increases, general increases for salaries and benefits and the internal service costs that you heard earlier. And then the increases for the contribution for the general fund support that we receive from HR, legal, finance, and DEI. For capital, I'm not going to go through the whole capital program with you, but I did want to highlight a couple of projects in there, specifically the ones that are over $1 million being expended within the biennium. So for water, many of these are actually related to other projects that are triggering water improvements. So again, getting that efficiency in doing those projects at the same time. So we have our Auburn Way South widening project and the water line upgrades that are happening with that. We have our Coal Creek Springs transmission main replacement. We have our D Street Southeast and 23rd Street Southeast storm improvement that is triggering, again, water improvements with that. The R Street widening project that includes water improvements. The reservoirs 4 and 8 seismic rehab, which is a grant-funded project. And then the West Hill Springs transmission line replacement. And then our standard repair and replacement program and street improvement program. And for water, there are no program requests. So before we move to sewer, are there any questions on water?
Questions on the water? No.
Okay. So.
Oh, well, if you insist, Councilmember Brown.
I'm okay if you don't have any questions.
Actually, it's not a question, it's a compliment. I just really want to compliment the folks that did that water replacement. And, you know, in my neighborhood, they did some pretty fancy work around a retaining wall I have, and they didn't even move anything in it. I was just really impressed, and they're just a good crew that, you know, your contractor did a good job, and just wanted to compliment you.
Thank you. Okay, so for sewer, so again, all the same budget increases and changes as we had for water. There really isn't much difference between the two. So for capital for sewer, again, a couple that are over $1 million within that biennium is the replacement of the Rainier Ridge Pump Station up on Lee Hill. and then our annual repair and replacement program and our street improvement programs, again, coordinating with those street projects. This one does have some program requests associated with it. So the first one of those is on page 351 of your book. And this is a request for, an ongoing request for a maintenance worker 1 for our sewer department. And this is primarily related to being able to resource a second jetting crew. So with our sewer system, the biggest issue, as I said earlier, is our fog program and keeping blockages from happening in the sewer system. So the biggest cost that we have to our sewer system is when we have those backups, especially if they cause damage on private property. And if they're caused by something within the public system, that becomes a burden on the sewer utility to clean up and address those issues. So this program, this additional staff is to help us reduce some of those issues by getting a second jetting crew out there and being able to be more proactive in addressing some of these issues, and again, resourcing that fog outreach to the businesses that are potentially causing some of those issues with what they are allowing to go down the drain. Okay. So our next item on that, again, CCTV camera and tractor. This is also related to, again, that fog program and trying to have the resources we need in place and having a second TV camera so that we can TV more lines and identify more problem areas and address them before they become problems, especially as we're dealing with the different property owners and businesses and what they might be doing to impact the system. So with that, any questions on the sewer?
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Ingrid, as a specialist in your field, and simply to put it on public record, are disposable wipes disposable?
No, they are not, and they should not be flushed at all. They actually cause significant issues in our pump stations. If you've ever seen some of our videos, we do have a picture in there that shows what that looks like for our staff to have to clean out our pumps of what gets clogged in there. So yes, flushable wipes are not flushable.
They're disposable.
Well, thank you.
Disposable in the garbage.
In the garbage.
But not down the toilet.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a soapbox moment.
I
for that one.
appreciate that.
All right, thank you so much.
Other questions, comments?
Okay. They don't have. Okay, so for the storm, it also, again, same exact lines as for the sewer and the water. The baseline change for 2022 to 2023 is about 539,000 or 6%. And for 2024, it's about 551,000 or about 5% increase. Again, all of that's related to those salaries and other adjustments in the internal service funds, the 1.5% utility tax increase, which is about 117,000 in 2023 and about 10,000 in 2024. And then the increase to those general fund support functions within HR, legal, DEI, and finance. So for our capital expenditures, obviously, again, we have an increase there with what we're doing, but focusing again on the those projects that are over $1 million within the biennium. So we have our D Street Southeast, 23rd Street Southeast storm improvements. We have just our annual repair and replacement program. We have our R Street widening and the storm improvements that are associated with that program. We have our West Main Street pump station upgrade, and then we have our vegetative sorting facility. Right now, we're currently using the Jacobson Tree Farm site for some of our vegetative sorting work, but that, as that gets developed out, we won't be able to use that for that vegetative sorting, so we do need to identify another location to be able to do that work, and that's where we separate out that vegetation that we take in all of the maintenance work that we do, separate it out so that we can then dispose of it more efficiently, effectively, and at a lower cost. For this one, there are 3 program improvement requests associated with this. 2 ongoing. One is our water resource technician, which is on page 323. So this is an FTE related to Obviously, our MPDS program, so with our source control program that we need to implement, we have identified that we believe that we need additional resources to help implement that program. Not necessarily a full FTE, so we've also identified that we want this position to also support our FOG program in sewer. So it's about 75% funded by storm, 25% funded by sewer, and is basically there to support, again, that source control program, which requires us to do a little bit more inspection and follow up with businesses and others around the city to identify those source control issues and then follow through with that. And then again, FOG, better communication with our businesses to try to reduce down how much fats, oils, and grease we have in our system. The last one in that is on page, where am I at? Oh, no, sorry. The next one in there is on page 349. So this is a request for 2 FTEs within our maintenance and operations division. These would actually be out of our street division, but they would be in our vegetation group. So as we talked about last week, that vegetation group is partially funded by storm because the positions actually support the storm facilities. So all of our ponds, all of our swales. So what we're finding is as the city grows and we get additional plats and public projects built, we need additional resources to handle that vegetation maintenance on those open facilities. And so that's what we're asking for here is 2 additional FTEs to handle that additional vegetation on those properties as it gets very significant through a good portion of the year, and the more that we can do regularly, the better we can maintain those facilities. And then the last request within storm is on page 350, and this is for a remote mower, again, to serve the storm ponds. So those areas of storm ponds where we have significantly steep grades on the ponds are very difficult and are a safety concern for our staff to be on a mower on a 2-to-1 slope trying to mow those sides of that. So we're asking to purchase a remote mower. The operator needs to be within visual distance of the mower, so they can't do it from at home or down at M&O. They got to be on site, but allows us to mow those areas more safely and allows the staff to remain safe while we're mowing those steep hillsides for those storm facilities. And that is the last one for storm. So any questions on storm?
Questions on storm, council? No. Okay.
And then the King County Metro Fund, this has a small baseline change, actually a reduction in 2023 of about $422,000, but an increase in 2024 of about $1.375 million. But the costs for that are all based upon King County's rates. King County's rate for 2023 is increasing by 5.75%. So that's going to play into the rates that we need to pay King County, and therefore the rates that we end up charging to the customers ultimately for that. So all of that cost is covered by the rates that are collected from our sewer customers. Any questions on
Questions on the King County Metro Sewer Fund? Okay.
All right.
So I'm thinking we should take maybe a 10-minute break, and hopefully we can get the technical issues
Sorted out.
corrected so that the screens are available for the rest of the presentations. Okay, we will go into recess for 10 minutes. Great job keeping things going.
Recording stopped.
Trying to find the bloody calculator on this phone. I was trying to project out what some of these costs were going to be over the next 2 years.
Well, it shows you what it's going to be over the next 2 years.
Well, it's got the individual years, those vehicles, please.
a year, so by 5 or 6 years, so 5 to 6 million, that's what she said. right. We will call the special city council meeting for September 27th,
in progress.
2022 back to order. We will welcome back our technology, and we will welcome back directors Thomas and Galp.
I did just send a copy of I just sent a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to your inboxes. So if you have your devices, we're going to be starting on page 73, and that might be more reliable than the screen.
Anybody touch anything?
Yeah.
Say, don't touch anything. Let me finish this one last slide. Okay, so the next enterprise program is the airport. So the airport's responsible for maintenance and operations of all the city-owned facilities at the airport. That includes the hangars, the tie-down spaces, the parking, the office buildings, the runway, taxiways, and the aviation fuel. In addition, we're responsible for management of the commercial and hangar tenants on site. There's also an airport advisory board that advises city council, the mayor, and staff on operations of the airport and other aviation concerns. So the airport, similar to the other enterprise funds, we have an operating budget and we have a capital budget. The capital program is funding improvements and major maintenance work with significant funding for the maintenance of the runway and taxiways provided to us through grants from FAA, covering about 90% of the costs for that maintenance work. So accomplishments for the airport. So prior to this biennium, we actually completed a contract with one of our tenants for the tenant to be able to sell Jet A fuel to customers at the airport. So year to date in 2022, they've actually sold about 6,680 gallons of Jet A fuel. For comparison, the airport has sold approximately 88,314 gallons of avgas fuel year to date for 2022. So we're also in the process of designing an enclosure for one of our open hangars, hangar rows, so it's about 17 hangars, using new federal funds and a state loan to fund that improvement, which will also increase the revenue generation for the airport. We also completed the removal of the night restrictions for the use at the airport, and we also completed the purchase of a portion of the King County Park and Ride property that's at the south end of the airport. That's about 3 acres, and that was for the ability to improve our runway safety area for the runway. We also completed an update to our airport rules and regulations, our minimum standards for commercial activity, and we completed development standards for the airport as well. So as we go into 23-24, some of our goals for the airport, implement a new and improved instrument approach being developed right now with the FAA. Continue to improve the sustainability of the airport through new revenues opportunities as they come available. This includes recruiting new businesses and tenants to the airport as we can. We also want to take advantage of clean energy initiatives when those are available as well, including the conversion of the low lead fuel for avgas to an alternative fuel, which is currently in the process with our vendors. And then continue our community outreach and education efforts. So you might think of our Auburn Airport Day. We also do tours for various groups out at the airport so people understand the importance of the airport and the impact it has on the community and on the economic value within the region. So for the budget highlights, the major changes on this really are related again to that salaries and benefits and the internal service fund charges, and then the capital increases that are there. The one program request that we have for this is to increase our operating costs. That is primarily related to the avgas fuel purchase and revenues, and as well as the facility maintenance needs. So as we continue taking over the operation and maintenance of the airport, and as we continue getting more traffic coming in now with the runway extension completed, we're having to true up some of those costs and expenses that exist within that operating budget. So this is an ongoing because it affects that baseline of the budget. That also includes the ground leases that we have. The agreements on those ground leases require that every 5 years we do an appraisal to set the new rate for those leases. That is coming up during this biennium, so there is a cost in there to do that appraisal. And then we also increased the cost for temporary staff. So what we did in 2022 is instead of relying upon a contract service, we relied upon temporary staff to help us with the vegetation management out at the airport. And that worked very well and provided a much better level of service for what we need. So we are proposing to continue doing that through, again, temporary staff resources rather than contract services. And then for the capital projects, the major items that are in our program are, again, continuing our repair replacement for our facilities. So that's the small fixes that we're doing within the different hangars and the main building. We have the weather station and beacon and emergency generator replacement. And we have continuing to enclose our open T hangars, so there is a much higher demand for closed hangars than open hangars. And we have a one-time opportunity with some of the funding that has been made available to us through the infrastructure bill, where FAA is allowing us to use those funds on revenue-generating improvements, which is not typically what FAA would use their funds for. So we have identified doing those enclosures for the hangars, which again is a revenue generation for the airport. And then our bigger project, which is will be under construction next year, is the runway taxiway rehab and runway safety area grading and our precision approach path indicator improvement. So that is, again, incorporating that area we just purchased from King County Metro's Park and Ride into that runway safety area and doing the grading work to make that part of the airport. So with that, are there any questions?
Deputy Mayor Jayraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. Director Gaub, on the capital project expense, can you elaborate why we have 2.1 million for 2022 and 4.2 million in 2023 and 1.1 million in 24? Why do we have a huge bump next year?
So that huge bump next year is that runway taxiway rehab and with the runway safety area. So that is basically new pavement for the runway and for all the taxiways, as well as regrading the south end of the airport to incorporate and remove some of the parking area that we just purchased from King County and move the fencing on that south side, as well as increase that fencing. So that fence is only a 4-foot high fence, so that is a security issue for the airport. So we'll be replacing that with a 6-foot high fence and the barbed wire that you see in the rest of the airport for security reasons, as well as doing the precision approach improvement for that. So that is a significant project, and that is, again, 90% funded, or almost 90% funded by FAA. And then we also will be seeking grants from the state to help fund the 10% portion for the airport.
Follow-up question. Why 2024, it goes down quite a bit?
Because we have less capital projects.
Okay.
So again, capital programs, it just depends upon what we actually plan in there. A significant portion of the work that we do at the airport, whenever we're doing significant projects, they are typically FAA-funded projects. So it depends upon those FAA funds and when they're available. The city gets about $150,000 a year in our what's called our primary entitlements from FAA for us to do improvements at the airport, again related to runway and taxiway lighting, things that are operational, not the things that are related to revenue generation. In addition to that, we can seek additional funding for other projects, but that is a competitive process that goes through the FAA for those funds. And so they typically send us a letter every year telling us what is identified for the next 5 years in the program, and so that's what we build our capital program on. So you'll see in that program we have next year's project, and then we have the weather station, the beacon, and the emergency generator replacement is another FAA-funded project in a future year in the capital program.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Is any of the money going towards like a new helicopter pad? Or is that part of this?
So that's not currently part of the 6-year capital program. It is in our airport layout plan or our master plan to potentially look at the west side for doing heliport areas, but it's not currently part of that 6-year plan, and it would mostly be triggered by somebody wanting to come in to run a business, triggering a need for us to develop that.
Okay, thank you.
We are looking at doing a driving range out there, however.
Well, with the amount of golf balls we find on the runway, I'm pretty sure it already is.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Now that we're talking golf, no, I was just going to say I'm excited to see the continued investment in the airport because I know that that is really a big economic driver for the city of Auburn. And in the space of the closing the hangars, when I had come through for my onboarding tour onto council, I had heard that there was just a lot of pent-up demand in the community to be able to get closed hangars for people who are utilizing the airport. So I think that that's going to be a really nice feature, and of course making sure that we keep it well-functioning, secure, and safe. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions or comments, council? I did get your attention with the driving range, though.
All right, thank you.
Tim, you'd like that. Yeah.
We're going to give Director Gaub a break for the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Ingrid.
And I'm going to invite up Daryl to talk about.
Who does have the driving range?
But we're going to be talking about the cemetery tonight.
Yeah.
I don't think we have enough space up there at the cemetery.
Now we're going to even hear me more. And it's been extremely successful in the last years under the operation of Director Craig Hudson and the team up there. There's also an office manager and 5 others who work on the grounds, producing about 300 services a year. We're one of 78 cities in the state that have a cemetery. There's other cemetery districts, but we're also the largest cemetery in the state that's run by a municipality, creating about $2 million a year in revenue and offsetting expenses. One of the missions of the cemetery is just to be a sacred place to strengthen the families in these times of need. And I just take great pride in the delivery that Craig does up at the cemetery. In that, I've been with him numerous times, as I know many of you have. And he's just got a heart for people, which is really important in this often stressful industry. And so it's really great to have him on the team. We're working on some small projects in the upcoming years, but first I'll talk about a few of those goals. We kind of switched away. 2 years ago, we were talking about a new mausoleum building, and with the capacity we have in our mausoleum, we've shifted away to 2 other developments instead. One will be the new design and construction of the 10th edition, it's called. Our cemetery is 75 years old, and it got to 10 additions by doing 10 of them. But anyhow, so an area that we purchased about 10 years ago, we're going to start developing in the next year, and then the year after that, we'll be developing an area up in Forest Walk, which is a place where people have niches, or maybe they scattered someone's loved ones in Puget Sound or in Mount Rainier, but they still want a plaque to memorialize them that they can go visit in person. And that's been really successful for us. So we're going to do a new development up there as well. One of the other accomplishments that we had in the past period is a new, you can go on the website under Find a Loved One and type in their last name or whatever information you have, and there'll be immediately a satellite image that takes you right down to where their marker is. It's also really nice because Emer in the office spent a lot of time going through almost a recipe box of cards of, it looked like an old library where you'd find somebody who passed in 1952, and then you'd have to figure out how to get the guest of the cemetery to that site. And now they can just sit down on their phone or however and be directly linked to where that loved one is buried. And that saved a lot of staff time, and also it's been great for a lot of people who are just doing research. So that's been a great project as well. So just a couple of things in the budget. Pretty minor. As you've seen last year, we went just a little over $2 million in revenue. We'll be right around that again this year. And our expenses last year, we had a really positive year coming out of COVID. As you recall, there were a lot of services that couldn't happen. There were a lot of restrictions on funerals that could happen, and then last year kind of got us going again. And I talked to Craig today, and we'll be right around that same number, a little over 300 services again this year. And we have a solid working capital, about 1.5 million in working capital available. And I think a little later we'll talk about the endowed care fund, and it has about $2.5 million in it. So we're really set up great, both with future land development opportunities. We're good for another 50 to 75 years, and we'll be looking at one other parcel that's hopefully will sell in the next few years. So we're set for land, and we're set for how our budget is working as well. So 2.5 million in the endowed care fund. I think that during the last BA back in 2021 to 22, we were fortunate to add one additional cemetery worker, and that made a big difference. Our numbers have really gone up. And with that, we've been really able to, I wanted to segue into like the diversity of our community just real quickly. We have found that a lot of our policies were really written in the 50s and 60s. And this is a new community where we're serving people from all kinds of different cultures who maybe have different styles or burial traditions. And so trying to stay up to date with the new Auburn, with what's going on up there. And it's been really fun and invigorating just to have Craig and the team learn that not everybody's coming from the local church. They may be coming from Ukrainian background or Palestinian or whatever it is. And it's just been really good to see. So we have that up there as well. There's only one program improvement at the cemetery this year. We're going to be replacing, hopefully, upon your concurrence, the backhoe. It's a 26-year-old John Deere backhoe that has dug a lot of holes. And you don't want your backhoe to go down when you're operating a cemetery. So we have a backhoe programmed in the next year. It comes out of working capital. It doesn't affect our rates. The new rates came in with the fees and charges schedule that you guys saw at the council on Monday evening. So it does a lot of the dirt work, both for burials as well as for trenching and other things. So it's a super important piece of equipment. After 26 years, its shelf life is pretty over. But they will be donating it to the parks team who really needs a backup backhoe. So it won't be completely out of our system. And you're the permanent fund, you're going to do those later. There's really not, the endowed care fund, just a percent of everybody's when you purchase property at the cemetery, a percent of that purchase goes into an endowed care fund, and we can use that for improvements. And also, should all the land ever in X number of years be gone, you could use these funds to maintain the cemetery in perpetuity after no more burials would happen there. So that concludes my presentation on the cemetery. Hopefully you've all had a chance to visit it. It's beautiful. They also do 1 or 2 burials a year at the Pioneer Cemetery, but the Parks Department maintains the Pioneer Cemetery. The Mountain View staff manages the occasional burials there. Any questions?
Questions, Council? Councilmember Trout Manuel. Your microphone, please.
When are we going to have a tour up there again?
Oh,
Since you've done some changes.
yeah, I'd be happy to. We can do it in a small group or however. I could send out a little invite. And it's great to tour, but there's also some great stories of who's been buried there that add to a little history thing. And we have worked with our museum in the past, and maybe we could do that again, where they do like a history of Auburn legends that are there.
That would be great.
Legends, good and bad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm curious if I'm missing maybe a Scribner's error. So we've got the CEM.0003 for the backhoe, which is on page 316. And that looks right, but it also mentions the one-time fund balance with CEM.0007, also on page 316. And that's from page 299 at the bottom.
It has a 7 here and a 3 on the new program request.
Just
It's 7.
okay.
That was an error on the PowerPoint.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No other questions? I'm
All right.
good.
Thank you, Daryl.
You bet.
And now we're going to move into our last but not least enterprise fund, and that is our solid waste fund. That is a utility that actually our utility billing and our finance department oversee. That will be in book 2, page 55. is where we start the solid waste fund discussion. Just as an overview, very briefly, we oversee we have mandatory garbage collection in the city of Auburn, within the city of Auburn limits, and we historically have always contracted out with a garbage hauler to provide those collection services. Until 2021, we always provided the billing and customer care portion of that, so it always was put on city staff to work very collaboratively with our garbage hauler, who was actually delivering the cans, picking up cans, change in service. So it was a kind of a pass-through of information. So if a customer wanted to change their garbage can size or change their service in any way, it would flow through the city. We would let the garbage hauler know. The garbage hauler then would let us know that the billing rates had changed. It's a really pretty inefficient. So we had a 10-year contract with Waste Management that provided those garbage hauling services. So one of our major accomplishments actually occurred at the end in quarter 4 of 2021, and that was we had finalized and actually transitioned into a new solid waste contract with Waste Management, where Waste Management is now our owner, what they call an owner-agent relationship. So they manage the customer service as well as the billing and the hauling for solid waste within the city. I'm not going to say that it hasn't been without some bumps and bruises. We knew it would. It's a very large change, a very large piece of coordination. And then it hit in the height of the beginning of supply chain issues in 2021. So then we had issues with getting all of the cans necessary, all the new can switch outs, as well as just staffing shortages on Waste Management's end and their subcontractors in getting cans delivered, and then communication issues. So it was an accomplishment that we got it done. So that means one of our primary goals really moving into 2023 and 2024 is continuing our utility billing staff working very closely with Waste Management to make sure that that customer service improves and that we continue to find refinements in the system, particularly from the customer's experience between calling Waste Management and getting resolution to any of questions or concerns, or even just service changes that they need. One of the other accomplishments that we began in the 21-22, and we actually had a budget amendment mid-year, that was enhancing our litter control program that is funded out of solid waste. So previously, we had started in Waste Management had taken over the kind of the Cleanscapes program, where they have routes that they drive every day, a different route that they drive every day, helping clean up litter throughout the city, just making the city look nice so litter isn't collecting. We continue to refine those routes to make sure that they're hitting the most important routes, making sure that they're actually picking up everything that they should be picking up. So when we're driving, and even driving certain routes multiple times a week, so the busiest streets like Auburn Way, for instance, that we are regularly picking up litter. But one of the things that we implemented in 2021 and 2022 was adding our own street crew to help with the emphasis that Waste Management was providing with their 2-person crew. And so we've been working really closely. We fund it out of solid waste. It is Ingrid's crew that is out doing the heavy lifting. They focus a lot on illegal dumping, hazardous waste pickup, and just general litter complaints around the city. But as far as a goal moving into 2023 and 2024 is really making sure that we continue to stay on top a lot of those complaints and those issues that we've had around illegal dumping and litter throughout the city. So we'll move into our budget highlights. We had a very significant increase over 2022, and that is almost entirely related to that new service contract that we entered into with Waste Management at the end of 2021. Part of that increase looks a little bit larger than it really is, only because we haven't yet done a budget amendment in 2022 to reflect the increased rates in 2022. Also to note that This increase was not unexpected. We did know that this increase was going to be coming. And if you may recall, in April of 2021, the council had approved a series of rate increases on the solid waste rates to help absorb and help absorb these increased contract costs with waste management. It is a big increase, and I'm just to refresh memories, we were held at rates that we were held for 10 years. So we were in a contract with Waste Management for 10 years. So those rates we knew were going to make a big adjustment, whether we had stayed with Waste Management or any other garbage hauler, just because those rates had been artificially held at a low for 10 years. And so now we've got that catch up, and we do have solid waste rate increases planned. The last rate increase approved by council does take effect on January 1, 2023. Again, that was part of a series of increases approved by council back in 2021. Part of the increases in the solid waste fund is offset by some decreases to general fund services. I know that a lot of those other funds that we've been looking at tonight have seen an increase in those general fund services. The solid waste fund has seen a decrease, a pretty significant decrease, and that's really related to our allocation method of using the number of FTEs by fund to determine how much of the general fund services they're getting allocated. And because solid waste really only has like 1.5 FTEs managing our diversion program, our recycle, yard waste, and garbage diversion program, that actually lessened a lot of that general fund service burden to the solid waste fund. Another increase that we need to take into consideration, like all of those other city utility funds, is the planned increase, if adopted by council, from adding the 1.5% for the city utility tax increase. And if we do move forward with that, we would need to probably look at another utility rate study for the solid waste fund moving into 2024 to take into consideration those increased taxes as a result. Are there any questions? Aside from that, there were no new requests for the solid waste fund.
Questions, council?
Okay. So now we're cruising. I'm not going to spend much time talking about this slide at all, mostly because Daryl already did me the favor of talking about one of the funds on here. And actually, Director Tate also talked about the first fund on here when he did his presentation on Monday night. So these three funds, just as a refresher from our Monday night discussion last week, fiduciary funds are money that we hold in trust for other agencies. It's not our money to spend. We are just responsible for holding it and dispersing it as we are told to. So we have three of them. One of them is the South King Housing and Homeless Partners on book 2, page 75. We collect approximately $300,000 a year in contribution revenue from partnering agencies. And I think a question had come up about whether or not we charged an administrative fee for managing the program, and we do, and that equates to about $35,000 a year. So all of the partnering agencies in their contribution also pay a small administrative fee to help alleviate the administrative costs that the city of Auburn carries for managing these funds. The second one is our fire pension fund. That is on book 2, page 61. This is where we pay all of our pre-LEF and our LEF 1 fire pension benefits. It's currently funded. Our annual pension payments are about $192,000 a year, it's fully funded. It's funded right now. We receive an annual fire insurance premium from the state, and those premiums are required to go into a fire pension fund if we have any pre-LEF retirees, and so we use that money to fund those pension payments, and that's sufficient to make those payments every year. And then last but not least is that cemetery endowment fund that Director Faber had referred to. We don't currently have any money that we are budgeting to spend out of that. We have to spend it specifically for the maintenance and preservation of the cemetery, like Director Faber had mentioned. We are currently just collecting that percentage of revenue and letting it collect interest until a time that we need to rely on that. Any question about the fiduciary funds?
Questions on the fiduciary funds, Council?
Okay. So now we're done with all of the other funds, all of our internal service funds, our enterprise funds, and I wanted to do a quick recap of our general fund summary that we had, that we wrapped up halfway through Tuesday, our Tuesday night presentation. So I've added kind of what our estimated, this is a very high level summary, our estimated beginning fund balance at the beginning of 23 into 2024. Our baseline revenue, assuming we did nothing different, if we just maintained programs and services as they are today. And then I highlighted in green the new revenue that we are proposing that are all related to expenditures. We don't have any programs that offer only revenue with no offsetting expenditures, unfortunately. I do want to highlight out that some of those revenues we are projecting to be ongoing. Some of them are just one-time transfers in. Those are for some of the one-time requests that directors had asked for within their departments. And then there's also a transfer that we are asking to come from the Cumulative Reserve Fund. That's part of the Cumulative Reserve Fund plan, reserve policy that we had talked about. That'll be on the next slide. I'll look at that in more detail. But we are relying on that in 2024. Then we've got our baseline expenditures, again, assuming business as we currently operate right now, no changes in service levels. And then adding the new expenditure requests, those are all the new program requests that we've gone over in the last 3 days. And then of those expenditures, some of those are one-time revenue or one-time expenditures. And so I separated out those ongoing expenditures versus one-time expenditures. And in summary, that totals 16 new requests, including 13 full-time employees. 3 of those employees, as Director Gaub had mentioned earlier, are not employees that we intend to fund until the next biennium and beyond. The 11 new requests that have one-time impacts are funded from our reserves, so just the fund balance that we have. And then the last bullet point was mentioning that $9.3 million transfer from cumulative reserve. Is there any questions?
Councilmember Malinga.
Thank you, Your Honor. With the 13 new FTE, what would it make the total FTE for the city?
For the general fund, that would increase us. Frank, do you have the total between all funds? Or just even the general fund?
Well, if you look under mayor and council, there are 477.75 FTEs for 2023. I don't know if that includes everyone or not.
I think that is citywide, not including our seasonal and temps, but that is citywide. So it's fewer than that in just the general fund. Do you have that number? Not specifically. We would have to go through and we have them total by department, but we would have to tally those up.
Okay, thank you, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Okay. So going back to the amendment to the reserve policy that I had mentioned, our current policy has us setting aside a target of 5 to 10% held in our cumulative reserve policy, or our cumulative reserve fund. And we're proposing that we increase this to 11 to 36%. So we do have some fund balance right now in our general fund currently. So if the council adopts or approves of this amendment to the reserve fund policy, we would do a transfer with the final budget amendment of this year to transfer a large amount of money into the cumulative reserve fund. And the blue and green charts below just show the how that 5 and 10% translates to dollars, and how the 11 to 36% translates to dollars, and how we would target funding by different within the category itself. So whether or not we're setting aside money for a year's worth of our debt service, how much money we set aside for economic conditions and general fund stabilization, capital and one-time programs, and then catastrophic events. If the council agrees, our cumulative reserve fund balance, which is in the right column, would look like this. Beginning at the beginning of 2023, we would have a 31% balance in our cumulative reserve fund. We have some capital expenditures through the new programs, again, if council approves the proposals that the directors have presented. And then the $9.3 million transfer in 2024 for economic stabilization, leaving a 16% fund balance in the cumulative reserve fund at the end of the biennium.
Councilmember Stearns?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. I was just curious why, on the very top of the slide, I mean, the spread between our current policy is 5 points, and the spread between the proposed policy is like 25.
Mostly because we have quite a bit of money that we want to hold in there for economic stabilization. A lot of it has to do with how much money do we have available right now. And we do have, if we were to transfer the money in our fund balance, it's about 31%. And so I was just trying to get a policy that would capture what we have, but also trying to keep it conservative, knowing that there might be a time where we do need to spend down, significantly less than 31%. And so just keeping a cushion there.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
We'd rather have some to be able to spend later than to not have it and try and have to look for it.
Exactly.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to help clarify for me, as we're looking at the general fund for the next 2 years, is we've seen sort of across the board for our different departments having increases from an operational perspective for salary and benefits being an expected increase that we would want to make sure that we're accommodating. Do we have a sense of what type of increased range we're looking at for cost of living adjustments? Mainly because I'm thinking of the space, we're looking at inflation in the community, we're looking at rising costs for things, and making sure that our employees are going to be, that we'll be able to have them keep pace with the rest of the world. So for what's planned that we've reviewed with each of the departments, what percentage range are we at for those operational increases that we've seen?
So it depends. Mostly it's the bargaining agreements that dictate what those salary increases are each year. So our police unions all have a contract that is good through 2023. Is that 2022, 2024. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm slowing down. So those contracts are good through 2024. So those rates have been established, and they are at 3% and 3% for 2023 and 2024.
Yep.
Our Teamsters are currently negotiating. Our unaffiliated staff we have at 3%.
Okay.
So that's what we have currently in the budget. And again, those are based on mostly bargaining agreements.
Okay, so then with the stabilization, is there an assumption that some of that may be paid out in addition to what we're planning for from an operational perspective, or still keeping the bulk of that in reserve?
We aren't relying on necessarily any of that cumulative reserve fund money for salaries. It's more of kind of, it's the amount, if we take what we've proposed for the 2023 and 24 budget, that's the amount that we would need just fund-wide to make sure that our revenues and expenditures are balanced.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Other questions, council?
And I just wanted to add to, we have in the past budgeted to transfer money from our cumulative reserve fund, because when we budget, we try to be really conservative, and make it not necessarily a worst case scenario, but just a just in case scenario. And with those transfers, we haven't always needed to transfer either any of it or even the whole amount. So I see this $9.3 million as a worst case scenario, not necessarily we'll need to rely on that full amount.
Councilmember Baldwin?
And to the point of having an increase in the reserve, I do generally think that it's a very good thing to be prepared for potential recession, potential inflation, and as the mayor has said, making sure that we don't have to go try and cut after the fact. Having that readiness, I think, puts us in a good position there. So thank you for staying ahead of the ball there.
There are unfortunately some cities around us that are not in fiscally good shape right now, and so I am always very thankful for the policies, the conservative approach that Jamie and her team take to ensure that we have funds available, because there is nothing worse than having to fluctuate with your workforce, because those are people and those are lives that we are impacting. And so we try to find a smoothing approach so that we are not going high when economy is great and having to cut significantly when the economy is bad. We have been down that path before, and it is not a fun one, and so we try to be conservative in our approach so that those who are on Team Auburn can remain on Team Auburn.
Okay. The last review is because it has been a week since we last reviewed it. The governmental capital. So if you recall, there's actually several funds that I have grouped together. Those are our 3 street funds, our capital improvement fund, our local revitalization fund, and our municipal parks fund, all using a various sources, whether it's REIT, impact fees, utility tax revenue, and a new 0.1% sales tax revenue. Between all those funding and all of those projects, across all those funds, we have 63 projects and programs that we're proposing to fund in 2023 and 2024 as part of our capital facilities plan. There's 2 new requests in here with one-time impacts that are funded with REIT, and that's the facilities master plan and the driving range, which we talked about last week with Director Gaub, and the Parks, Art, and Recreation Department. We also pay $705,000 a year in debt service out of these capital funds. And the summary there shows you that we have an estimated beginning fund balance at the beginning of 2023 of $30.8 million. And with our estimated revenue and our projects and our capital facilities plan, we expect to end 2024 with $16.2 million with all those funds combined.
Questions?
Any questions? So we're to the next step slide. There's a lot of next steps here. I was having a hard time fitting it all into one slide, and this really has a lot to do with how much legislation is required with this particular budget, this biennium. Just a reminder that these discussions from the last 3 nights will help guide and direct staff on how to move forward with a 2023-2024 preliminary budget. So any feedback, comments that we receive from these workshops, we will be either moving forward with as proposed to you over these last 3 meetings or amendments as you guys have asked for. And we will be filing the preliminary budget on October 24th. We'll bring that to the study session. We'll just do a high-level overview of what we've been discussing the 3 meetings. We'll review our major revenue sources, which is our property tax ordinance. And then we'll have our first utility rate presentation review from our consultants. November 7th, we are going to have our first 2 public hearings. As part of the biennial budget process, we are required to have 3 public hearings. And then we are going to go into our November 14th study session, where we'll have our 2nd utility, or our 3rd utility rate presentation. And then on November 21st, we will have our third public hearing as it relates to the budget. We will need a public hearing for the utility rate changes if the council does adopt the proposals as staff has presented. And then we have 4 more sets of legislation to adopt. So we've got the biennial budget, as well as the capital facilities plan, the property tax ordinance, the 1.5% city utility tax increase, and any utility rate changes that we propose that you'll be seeing over the next month and a half. There is one more piece. We talked last night about that 0.1% sales tax levy, and that is assuming would be adopted at next week's council meeting.
Questions on the schedule, Council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. With this being my first budget on council, one of the questions I have is we do have a number of additional October meetings, both for study sessions and council, between now and the 24th. Are there going to be opportunities in those sessions to ask additional questions if we have them, or provide any other commentary that would be input to the revised budget that'll come to the clerk?
We are more than happy to answer any questions along the way at any point. We really rely really heavily on these budget workshops for incorporating any feedback and changes. We have just working backwards with the amount of time it takes to prepare the actual preliminary budget, get it to the printer, get them back, and then get them distributed back to council in time prior to that October 24th meeting. We have a really compressed time for making any changes. Really after moving out of these budget workshops, but that doesn't mean we're not available to answer any questions. And if there's a concurrence of the council that we need to move forward with making changes, then we can look at it at that point. But we're working with a pretty compressed time frame once we move beyond these budget workshops.
Okay.
Other questions, Council? Deputy Mayor Jayraj?
Just a statement. I think as far as questions are concerned, I think any council member can pick up the phone and call any of the directors for clarification. So that would eliminate extra time on council meetings or study sessions. Thank you.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just if this is our window for these conversations, I think the one, looking at what some of the biggest costs are that we'll be seeing come down the chute, we of course have our facilities master plan, which is a one-time, our driving range investment, the ERP system, and then the patrol fleet expansion. So looking at those things, the one that seems to be most relevant in the ongoing space is the patrol fleet expansion. And so I know one of the motivations behind that is that's very good for retention and hiring. But one concern that I have is, while I do think that that's a good thing and I want to support it, I want to be mindful of I guess, being asked twice to accommodate the same root cause. So if we have a need to have better, hiring, better retention of staff, I look to the fact that since I've been on council, we had already had the ARPA, retention bonuses and hiring bonuses that had come through. So I would want to know, were those bonuses successful in helping with retention and with hiring? Or if that's not been put into place yet, I want to know what the results of that were before immediately going to having another program to effectively do the same thing that we had already tried to achieve, right? And so that's, I think, the biggest concern from my standpoint is that I know we need to get more law enforcement officers. I know we need to have good coverage for our community, but I don't want to be paying twice to get the same, to try and achieve the same goal.
So, Councilmember Baldwin, I can speak to some of that. The excuse me, the retention bonuses go a certain amount, but there are retention bonuses, there are signing bonuses throughout the state for officers. And often when we are talking with an individual who is either a lateral or a new hire, an entry-level officer, the questions are being asked about, are there take-home vehicles or assigned vehicles? And we have lost some interest because we do not currently have assigned vehicles. So it is proving to be an attraction issue. And we heard very loud and clear from people, from business owners that we had in this space just last week around the Fred Meyer area regarding crime, homelessness, drug use. And they made it perfectly clear that they expect to see our officers with assigned vehicles. So this is what the community is asking for. This is what our police officers are asking for. And this is what we are hearing from those interested in a profession of law enforcement, that it is the new expectation for attracting and retention officers. If you think about it like sharing a desk or sharing an office, most of us are not interested in sharing an office. We are interested in having our own space. And as you heard from Chief Collier and Assistant Chief Betts, there are significant benefits, not just in the attraction of officers, but significant benefits to the public safety of this community by having those take-home or assigned vehicles. So it's not an either or. It's not we used ARPA funds for retention bonuses. That's keeping some officers. That's not an attraction, right? We do have signing bonuses, as do all of the cities, a good number of them in the state, but especially those in King County, because we do have additional burdens on us as being part of King County that other counties in this state do not have. Yes.
And that's helpful information. I think one thing that would help me in supporting the program, because I know that I spent some time looking into it, like the vehicle duration, as Ingrid had mentioned, for the fleet management, we have the potential for those to be hybrid vehicles. The turnover rate for the life cycle of those vehicles is that they have a longer duration, which is fantastic. I know that it is an attraction for hiring into the city. But I would like to have maybe some more information about what the policies around that program will be. Would be helpful to know going forward. And then, like I said, my main concern was, have we not already, funded this effort to have retention and hiring, and the concern of making sure that if we have limited budget, as I know certainly every household does, are we paying for the same thing twice, right? And so I just want to make sure that we have the discussion, we have it openly, and to the mayor's point, if this is something that needs to be in addition to, fair enough, but I want to make sure that we ask, right?
I don't think we're funding twice. These are very separate issues, and a retention bonus after taxes is not exactly going to set the world on fire. The assigned vehicles are something that our community has asked for. Council, I don't know if any of you have any opinions on it at this time or not, but I can assure you that when we were going through and putting this budget together, we did have a significant amount of discussion amongst all of the directors on where we should spend our limited funds. And when directors from other departments are willing to put the take-home vehicles as a higher priority than some of the asks that they had, that gives you a very good, compelling reason as to why it should be supported in this budget.
All right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Jayaraj.
Thank you, Your Honor. My experience hanging out with some of the police officers, when I first came on board, went on training, and we had some new recruits. And I knew most of them over the period of time. And the last time I went to the training was a few months ago. And I walked up to this recruit. He was a recruit a couple of years ago. And now he's an officer. And I heard he was leaving. I said, why are you leaving? I'm going to Tacoma, there's a take-home car. So we're losing officers because of that. And, you know, it's like we train them and then they go somewhere else. I don't feel right about it. Seriously, I want them to stay here. And that's my justification for them to have take-home cars at this point.
Thank you. I will, just one moment, Councilmember Stearns. I will be quite frank with you that I have not always been the biggest proponent for the assigned vehicles because I would always rather pay for people than things. However, when it is apparent to me that the public safety, the safety of our community is at stake, if we cannot attract officers to be part of this community and to provide that public service, then that becomes a significant issue and one that I can stand firmly behind. And that's why it is in this budget. We did have to extend the length of the program in order to make it work in this budget, but it was a priority that was set by all of the directors when we were going through budget items. Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I appreciate what you had to say because I wasn't aware that the other directors were backing this, which is, you know, I think the program is good. It's good that we have it, but I also really appreciate the other directors and the initiative and the support they've shown. I would just sort of make one suggestion that, you know, as future prep budgets are developed, we also consider, you know, adding, you know, as we go electric, you know, to make sure that, you know, when officers bring their cars home, they can charge them in their own homes.
Yeah, maybe one thing that we didn't make really clear at the beginning of these budget sessions, all of the directors and their teams put together their budget requests. And then the directors and I got together for 4 or 5 hour sessions. And we went through all of the items. Now, do you see everything that was requested? No. What you have is a budget that all of the directors and I put together, and we prioritized items based on the needs for the community. We had a scoring matrix that we utilized that would allow us to understand the needs, and not just because I'm friends with that director, they're going to get what they want, or I don't like that director, so I'm not going to support their items. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the explanations of why it's important for this community that we are serving. And so the budget that you have in front of you that's been presented over 3 nights is a budget that is fully supported by every director and myself. Councilmember Malinga, did you have a question or a comment? And then I'll come back to you, Councilmember Baldwin.
No, I just had a comment really quick. I wanted to say that I believe that public safety is extremely important. And although this is a costly investment, I believe it's an investment that needs to be made. So I'm very much in support of this initiative to get these cars.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Your Honor. And this is exactly the conversation I was hoping to be able to have, because it makes me feel more confident in being able to support the budget. So I know it keeps us here a little bit longer, and I know there's been a lot of work that's gone into it already, but having that additional feedback, the additional detail and input, it helps significantly. So thank you so much.
Yep. No, this is exactly why we have these. It's for you to ask questions. It's for you to have conversation. If it was just a presentation without dialogue, I would be a little worried. Maybe happy that there were no questions or comments, but a little worried that perhaps the engagement wasn't there. You have all proven that the engagement is here, that you are taking this seriously, and that is the most that we can ask for. Budget and policy are your 2 main responsibilities as council members, and I can see, and I think the directors can all see, that you have been taking this very seriously and are definitely engaged. So thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, I would just say that, you know, I've spent a good part of my professional life negotiating for paying benefits. And I can't tell you how many times an employer says to you, look what we did. Well, that's already been done. And that you do have to remain competitive if you want to draw good talent. You know, I hear employers talk about, you know, that people don't want to come to work. Well, you know, if you pay more than minimum wage, if you pay a living wage and a competitive wage in the market for that particular job, you're going to get people to come in. And so while, you know, nobody wants to spend more money than we have to, but in the case, you know, as Councilmember Malinga said, public safety is really important. So if this is what we need to do, I too support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have to be honest, I did have a little bit of concerns about this when it was first brought to us, because it is a lot of money. But I do have to agree with Ms. Malinga about if we're going to protect our citizens, our constituents, our children, we do have to do the investment. Even though there's a little bit of concern, I am supporting this. But I am so glad that we have a councilwoman that is always asking more questions than all of us that are here on the dais. Even though sometimes it's repetitive, it's still good. So thank you, and I'm supporting this.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Anything else? Directors, anything else? Council? Jamie, thank you to you and your team, directors, to each one of you and your teams for the thoughtful work that you have done and you continue to do for this city. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Recording stopped.